Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I beg to move Amendment 7 in my name, and I thank the noble lady Baroness Jolly for her support. This is actually the survivor of a suite of amendments that I moved in committee. I've actually, about half an hour ago, tweeted out the Hansard link to that for anyone who's interested, and also a link to an ecologist article I wrote at that time. They were all about the environmental impacts of medicines and medical devices, including the impacts of packaging. Now, responding for the government, the noble lady Baroness Penn then suggested that the packaging issues, the issues around medical devices, those environmental issues would be covered elsewhere, notably in the Environment Bill. She did, however, acknowledge the importance of these issues. Some of those amendments were relating particularly to antimicrobial resistance, and I quote the noble lady Baroness Penn, who noted that that has been placed on the National Risk Register of Civil Emergencies as a longer-term trend likely to change the overall risk landscape for the UK over the coming decades. I think that is an acknowledgement by the government of the importance of these issues around antimicrobial resistance, but also I think we're starting to see much bigger issues. We've seen the government acknowledge in other contexts about the cocktail effects of drugs and chemically active compounds in the natural environment. Now, I'm not convinced by the argument presented by the noble lady Baroness Penn about the other amendments, but since this is report stage, I decided to focus down on this one single amendment, and one in which I think the government has actually unintentionally very strongly made its own case for, by ways by which I will come to at the end of my comments. But to briefly set out the case for why the Environment Bill, general environmental legislation won't cover medicines. The fact is that human medicines are highly active, biologically active substances that are in the human body, that pass through the human body. The medics will tell you that they need to be at still very high concentrations when they pass out of the human body to ensure they have medical effectiveness. And of course, they're also metabolized in the human body, in the natural world, in both anaerobic and aerobic environments. And it's highly unlikely that normal legislation about waste, normal environmental legislation, is going to be able to deal with that, let alone its impact on human microbiomes and the microbiome all around us. If we bring this back to the practical, the manufacture of baked beans might be regulated about the impacts of the tin, might be impacted about the impacts of consumption on human health. But in normal food safety or environmental health impact assessments, the broader impact of those consumption of baked beans is probably not going to be taken into account. Now, I'm aware that your Lordship's House may find me often citing some fairly technical science, and I'm afraid I'm going to do it again. But just, I think, as one example, I'm going to cite a 2018 article from the Frontiers in Microbiology. The title of the article is Antibiotic Effects on Microbial Communities Responsible for Denitrification and Nitrogen Dioxide Production in Grassland Soils. Your Lordship's House might note I've been spending lots of time at the Oxford Real Farming Conference recently. Now, just to quote a sentence from that article, it says, acute effects of tetracycline on soil microbial community composition and production of nitrous oxide and dinitrogen as the end products of denitrification are an increase in the fungi-bacteria ratio and a significant decrease in the abundance of bacteria carrying a certain gene. Now, those who follow these issues will know that that has significant climate change impacts, but it also has very serious soil impacts. And before my next comments, I feel I perhaps should declare my membership of the APPG on the human microbiome. If we think about the human microbiome that we have in our skin, on our skin, in our lungs, and in our gut, that also has impacts on the microbiome all around us. And the medicines we take have impact on both of those. That's the microbiome of everything from bees to bats, something that perhaps COVID-19 might help us understand the complexity of these systems we're dealing with. And the fact is, past generations have left us with a poisoned planet. If we think about longer term historically, various diseases were treated with mercury. Many poisons have also been used as medicines. And of course, many chemicals we've used that are now widespread in the environment are having enormous impacts. Looking at a story that just came out this morning about the fertility of male porpoises living off the UK, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, which were phased out decades ago, but are still having impacts today. So what we're talking about here is really systems thinking, which is where I come to the point where the government, I believe, makes its own unintentionally argument for this amendment to the bill. Because I point, noble lords, to page 6 of the bill, which covers part 2, chapter 1, covering veterinary medicines. And clause 2.3 of that says, and I quote, the protection of the environment. And we're talking about here that veterinary medicines, the authority making the regulations, has to be sure it promotes the protection of the environment. When, however, we come to page 1 of the bill, the absolutely matching or almost matching clause under chapter 1 on human medicines, we have the same first 2 clauses, and then we go on to talk about being an attractive place to conduct clinical trials of human medicines. But there's something missing, those words that are the protection of the environment. So what I've chosen to do, my lords, in this amendment is to simply take exactly the government's own words as used in the veterinary medicine part of the bill, and say that we simply have to apply the same oversight, the same approach to human medicines as we are to veterinary medicines. And I come back to, as this debate so often has, the brilliant report of the noble lady Baroness Cumberledge, and the title of that report, which is First Do No Harm. The government has accepted that principle, I would say, in putting the clause on environmental impacts in the veterinary medicines section of the bill. I really cannot see how it can justify not doing the same with human medicines. So on that basis, in your lordship's house, I've only previously called one vote myself. That was on what you might call the grand matter of principle, which was about freedom of movement. At the moment, I'm feeling very inclined to also call a vote on this amendment, because we are in a situation where our planet is right at its limits, right at its edge. We are all on the edge. Our life is on the edge. And we can't keep saying about the environment, oh, we'll include that over in this little silo over the environment bill. We have to look at the impacts of everything we do. And when we look at human medicines, the impact of human medicines on the environment is very significant, as the impact of veterinary medicines is. So I'm going to listen very carefully to the debate, to what people have to say, what the Minister has to say, and I'd be very interested for his explanation of why the veterinary medicines and human medicines sections of the bill are different. But at the moment, I'm certainly in the inclination to think about testing the opinion of the House on this amendment. Thank you, my lords.
Amendment proposed.